Mexico are being trafficked in from the United States. This is one reason I'm proud to co-sponsor with my good friend Congresswoman Maloney the Gun Trafficking Prevention Act, which is being reintroduced today on a bipartisan basis by our colleague, Ms. Maloney. If we can stem illegal gun trafficking in the United States, there's no doubt the positive effects will be seen by our neighbors to the south. Finally, let me say this. The United States must take all appropriate steps to ensure that our diplomats are safe and fully and fairly compensated. I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, that that must happen. This includes building modern, secure diplomatic facilities. Construction plans are underway in Mexico, Matamoros, and Naval Laredo to build new diplomatic facilities that will house Marine barracks to ensure even greater protection of our personnel. I understand that the State Department is changing how it pays employees serving in dangerous and difficult environments. I appreciate the Department's efforts to use resources effectively and consistent with the law. But I believe no employees who serve on the front lines abroad should face reductions in pay. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about how to further improve the safety of U.S. personnel while promoting our long-standing and mutually beneficial relationship with Mexico. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman, and yeah, I would like to associate myself with your comments about some of our colleagues, Mr. Vela, as well as Mr. Cuellar, who's here and joining us on the stand. My understanding is that Congressman Vela would also like to participate with us today. Even though these two gentlemen are not on our committee, we have had a tradition of allowing and asking unanimous consent to allow people to sit in on these hearings. And so I would ask unanimous consent that our colleagues, Congressman Filemon Vela and Congressman Henry Cuellar, be allowed to fully participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. We appreciate the perspective from these two gentlemen. They live in great proximity to the issues, things that we're going to be talking about today, and they've been invaluable to me and providing a good, I think, balanced perspective, and appreciate their passion on this issue and their care for the loved ones that are there in that area, and appreciate their perspective. I'm glad they're joining us today. We'll now recognize our first panel of witnesses, but I would like to tell members that I will hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who would like to submit a written statement. We're pleased to be joined by Mr. Gregory Starr, Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Diplomatic Security at the United States Department of State. Ambassador William Moser is the Principal Deputy Director of the Bureau of Overseas Building Operations at the United States Department of State. He has a long storied history at the State Department. We appreciate your service, and thank you for joining us here today. Ms. Sue Sarnio, did I pronounce it properly? I hope so, is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs at the United States Department of State. Mr. Robert Harris is the Director of the Joint Task Force West at the United States Customs and Border Protection. And Mr. Brandon Judd is the President of the National Border Patrol Council at the American Federation of Government Employees. We thank you all for being here. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses are to be sworn before they testify, so if you will please rise and raise your right hand. Thank you. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect that all witnesses have answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for discussion, we would appreciate limiting your verbal testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire written statement will be made part of the record. Mr. Starr, we will start with you, and then we will simply go through, and then we'll get to the question portion of the hearing. Mr. Starr, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and distinguished committee members, good morning, and thank you for your invitation to appear today to discuss the security situation near U.S. consulates at the border in Mexico. We share your concerns regarding the security of U.S. personnel in Mexico, and I look forward to discussing these issues with you today. Our national interests often require us to serve in dangerous places around the world. However, it is clear that the U.S. Embassy and consulates in Mexico are exceptionally important platforms for diplomatic and consular engagement to advance our national interests. I was in Mexico a few weeks ago and can bear witness to the hard work and dedication of U.S. personnel serving on both sides of the border. I also saw the challenging circumstances in which many of our people operate. Environments such as Mexico involve constantly shifting threats that require comprehensive planning, agile decision-making, and deft diplomacy. Most of all, they require us to be present, fully engaged, and 100% committed to the security of our people and our facilities. In Mexico, we engage with and seek support where necessary from a host government that recognizes Mexican and American vital interests are linked and that bilateral cooperation is required to counter the threats posed by transnational criminals. In every incident, threat, and attack in Mexico, this only underscores the continued importance of the strong bilateral relations and the comprehensive security cooperation. Our embassy and consulates in Mexico play a critical role in providing services to American citizens, issuing visas, and implementing key foreign policy objectives. I work closely with my colleagues in the Bureau of Overseas Buildings Operation as the Department builds diplomatic missions in Mexico to increase safety and security. These new facilities are vital platforms for diplomacy, all of which will meet the rigorous Overseas Security Policy Board standards for safety and security. During my recent visit to some of the border consulates, I walked with the principal officers and regional security officers to view the additional security measures taken and augmented host country security presence protecting our facilities. These protective features allow us to operate necessary programs that strengthen Mexico police capacity, reinforce critical law enforcement cooperation, and improve security along our southern border. These consulates also aid the expansive bilateral trade that supports both countries, totaling over $500 billion annually. But it is simply not enough to improve physical security. We are also training the Foreign Service community on how to better respond in these environments. All officers under Chief of Mission Authority at our border posts in Monterey are required to take the Foreign Affairs Counter-Threat Training Course, also known as FACT, which teaches them hard security skills. As a result, personnel at our missions are better prepared for operating in challenging environments, and we are working towards making FACT training universal for all Foreign Service personnel at our posts overseas, regardless of the threat levels. I recognize the hardships that our people and the families endure in such environments. It is a testament to their courage, their commitment, and the important work that they are accomplishing abroad. Having served over 30 years in the Foreign Service, I understand wholeheartedly the sacrifices our people make. It is simply woven into the fabric of what uniquely defines the Foreign Service community. Knowing the challenges ahead, they willingly and courageously step up to fill the important positions that we have in Mexico and throughout the world. I look forward to working with Congress to ensure our personnel are serving abroad safely and that they continue to have safe platforms for advancing our national interests. And I want to thank Congress for the resources and support that you have provided over the years, and we look forward to your continuing support in years ahead. Thank you, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Ambassador Moser, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. And thank you very much for the invitation to appear before the committee today to discuss the U.S. consulates in northern Mexico. Security is a top priority for the Bureau of Overseas Building Operations. Since the enactment of the Secure Embassy Construction and Counterterrorism Act, SECA, of 1999, OBO has completed 122 more secure facilities and have an additional 39 in design or under construction. These facilities provide more than 35,000 people with a safer workplace. Constructing secure diplomatic facilities in Mexico underscores our commitment to strengthening our bilateral relationship and reflects increased U.S.-Mexican commitments to issues such as migration, counter-narcotics, trade, and border security. Over the last 7 years, OBO has constructed new consulate general facilities in Mexico in Ciudad Juarez, Tijuana, and most recently in Monterey. Together, these facilities provide safer workspace for over 770 staff. Our work continues in northern Mexico with the new U.S. Consulate General in Nuevo Laredo under construction and expected to be completed in 2017. This new consulate will provide workspace for approximately 150 staff. Another U.S. Consulate General in Matamoros is in design and expected to be awarded for construction this fall and completed in 2019. This new Consulate General is planned to accommodate approximately 197 staff. We have an active and aggressive site search underway in Mexico to meet our commitments. We are under contract for new Consulate General sites in Nogales, Guadalajara, Hermosillo, and anticipate closing on these sites in 2015 and 2016. We are also in the process of evaluating sites in Merida to replace the existing facilities. Additionally, a new U.S. Embassy in Mexico City is currently in design and includes office space for over 1,300 staff members, a U.S. Marine Security Guard residence, and a consular area with over 75 teller windows. OBO works closely with diplomatic security every step of the way on all of our projects. OBO and diplomatic security, physical, technical, and industrial security specialists are involved in project development from early site selection, planning, design, construction, and through occupancy. All U.S. diplomatic facilities built by OBO meet the Department's standards for security and life safety. By 2020, we expect to have constructed or broken ground on over 9 new diplomatic facilities in Mexico that will serve as secure platforms from which to conduct diplomacy and to fulfill foreign policy objectives for many years to come. And I am happy to answer your questions at any time.
Thank you. Ms. Serino, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. As the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State responsible for our Mexico portfolio in the Western Hemisphere Bureau, I want to assure you, as my colleagues have, that the safety and security of our colleagues in Mexico are our top priority. I started my diplomatic career in Mexico City, and I would be proud to serve in Mexico again. I'd like to share with you today the work that the State Department performs to assist American citizens in Mexico's border region. I will highlight the measures we're taking to enhance security in Mexico through strong bilateral cooperation, while ensuring the safety of U.S. personnel, particularly of those serving in the U.S. consulates along the U.S.-Mexico border. The State Department closely examines all threats to our diplomats, locally employed colleagues, and U.S. facilities. The Department assesses daily the risks the U.S. personnel face as they do their jobs in a constantly shifting landscape. We seek a balance between the critically important work our people do, including the consular services provided to American citizens in Mexico, and the inherent risk of working in a challenging security environment. At every step, we work to ensure the security and safety of all American citizens, but particularly our diplomatic colleagues in Mexico. We remain vigilant, and we analyze carefully new potential threats. Our embassy and our consulate personnel meet frequently with Mexican federal, state, and local counterparts to discuss these concerns and to ensure that all appropriate measures are being taken to protect our personnel and U.S. citizens of business. We have systems in place that allow us to communicate rapidly and effectively with U.S. citizens when the security situation changes. Our travel warning, country-specific information, and security messages provide U.S. citizens with our best assessment of the risks they may face when traveling to certain regions in Mexico. The United States and Mexico share a mutual investment in security and prosperity. The State Department, along with key U.S. government agencies such as the Justice Department, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, and others, work with the Mexican government through the Merida Initiative to combat transnational criminal organizations and to protect our citizens from the crime and violence these organizations generate. Because of our robust and ongoing dialogue with Mexico on security issues, Mexican federal authorities have taken action to improve security conditions and reduce violence, particularly in the state of Tamaulipas, where the United States government is represented at the border consulates of Nuevo Laredo and Matamoros. The bilateral economic relationship between our two countries is huge. Indeed, the two-way trade topped $550 billion in 2014. 80% of that trade crossed the U.S.-Mexico land border. Our integrated economic relationship supports thousands of jobs in both countries, and hundreds of thousands of people legally cross our border each day. Mexico remains the top foreign destination for travelers from the United States. In fact, we estimate that on any given day, there are 1.5 million American citizens in Mexico. Our U.S. Consulates General in Nuevo Laredo and Matamoros in particular support this vibrant relationship through visa services for tourists, students, and workers. They provide critical services to the some 138,000 U.S. citizens living in their consular districts, and to thousands of U.S. visitors and the commercial travelers. These services include passport issuances and renewals, issuances of consular reports of birth abroad, providing information on voter registration, and offering notary services for documents to be used in the United States. The consulates also provide emergency services to American citizens who are arrested, kidnapped, or face temporary destitution in Mexico. We share the committee's concern about the levels of violence in certain areas in Mexico, and we assess the overall environment on a daily basis. We believe that U.S. interests are best protected by maintaining a strong presence on the ground in Mexico and continuing our close law enforcement and security relationship. We review and monitor the situation daily and have been taking all appropriate steps to ensure the safety of American citizens, including government personnel. I want to assure you this is and will continue to be a top priority for me, my leadership, and the Department. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Mr. Harris, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and distinguished members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to speak about the Department of Homeland Security's Southern Border and Approaches Campaign's Joint Task Force West, which represents the next evolution of border security on our nation's southern border. I assumed the position of Director of the newly created Pilot Joint Task Force on December the 15th, 2014. Prior to this position, I was the first-named commander of Customs and Border Protection's South Texas campaign, where I served from February 2012 to December 2014 in Laredo, Texas. I've held numerous executive leadership positions in my more than 30-year Border Patrol career, to include serving as Chief Patrol Agent of the Laredo, Texas, and Spokane, Washington Border Patrol sectors, Chief of Intelligence Operations, and as the Deputy Chief of the U.S. Border Patrol, where I led and managed the transition of the U.S. Border Patrol into the then newly created U.S. Customs and Border Protection in 2003. I want to take a moment to speak to you about the Southern Border and Approaches Campaign and the Joint Task Force West. This campaign directs DHS resources in a collaborative fashion with pre-identified, component-validated, Secretary-approved targets spanning a range of threats and challenges, including the terrorist threat, illegal immigration, drug, human and arms trafficking, and the illicit financing of all of these operations. I'm working hand-in-hand with my counterparts, Vice Admiral William Dean Lee from the U.S. Coast Guard, Director of Joint Task Force East, and Special Agent in Charge David Marwell, HSI Special Agent in Charge, Director of Joint Task Force Investigations. Although we are in our early stages, we are working to coordinate DHS forces and leverage Department of Defense, international, state, local, and tribal resources to combat the transnational criminal organizations who exploit vulnerabilities in our southern border and approaches. This level of integration among DHS component agencies is unprecedented since the creation of the Department in 2003. The Joint Task Force West will secure the southern border and approaches through departmental unity of effort, thereby integrating and prioritizing DHS security operations. Our 5 primary objectives in Joint Task Force West are: integrate and align our intelligence capabilities, institutionalize integrated counter-network operations to identify and target transnational criminal organizations and their illicit networks, prioritize investigative efforts to disrupt, degrade, and dismantle transnational criminal organizations and illicit networks, strengthen international, prosecutorial, and deterrent efforts against transnational criminal organization enterprises and significant activity impacting the Joint Task Force West Joint Operating Area. And finally, advance the Joint Task Force West mission through unified communication and messaging efforts. The structure of the Joint Task Force West focuses cross-departmental and integrated counter-network operations on strategic objectives across 4 geographic corridors: California, Arizona, New Mexico, West Texas, and South Texas. The Joint Task Force West will focus on creating and implementing a standardized methodology for identifying and prioritizing strategic targets based on national security, public safety, and border security threats. We have begun the threat prioritization process by developing a concept of operations plan and courses of action for each corridor. The goal will be to expedite integrated counter-network operations against a list of prioritized transnational criminal organizations across the southwest border on October 1st, 2015. This has never before been done in a coordinated and integrated means across the entire southwest border. These corridor operations will expand our ability to impact illicit networks beyond the border from their point of origin to destination point through integrated DHS and interagency cooperation. These joint efforts will result in consequence application to identified targets through investigation, enforcement, and administrative actions. The Joint Task Force framework also enables DHS to streamline our collaboration, innovation, and integration with other government entities. For example, in the South Texas corridor, we have taken steps to move past collaboration and into the integration of intelligence, investigation, and interdiction resources, and have conducted counter-network operations against prioritized threats. This new partnership further reduces institutional barriers and duplication of effort, provides for a unity of effort, understanding the threat network, and enhances our ability to dismantle these networks. I am confident that moving forward, the Southern Border and Approaches campaign will effectively disrupt, degrade, and dismantle threats in a strategic and coordinated manner like never before, and improve our ability to combat criminal organizations who present a threat to our efforts to secure the southern border. I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Judd, you now recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings. In June, a CBP helicopter was shot and forced down in Laredo, Texas. To many in Washington, this was a wake-up call to the increasing violence on the Mexican border. Unfortunately, this was far from an isolated incident. For example, in 2014, less than 100 miles from the helicopter shooting, Border Patrol agent Javier Vega was murdered defending his family from 2 armed illegal immigrants while on a fishing trip. One of the murderers had been deported 4 times, the other twice for illegally crossing the border. 20 years ago, and about the time I joined the Border Patrol, the Zetas, Sinaloa, Gulf, and Knights Templar cartels did not exist or were not widely known. Although narcotics and illegal immigrant smuggling were conducted by organized crime, it was not nearly on the level we see the cartels operating today. There were even relatively small-time players conducting smuggling operations within a given area of operations. Although violence could and did erupt, the older generation of smugglers took the long view. They would rather risk losing a load of narcotics to the Border Patrol than opening fire on agents. Violence brought unwanted attention on both sides of the border, and that was bad for business. This all began to unravel in the early 2000s with the emergence of the drug cartels. These cartels are well-organized, heavily armed, and pathologically violent. To give you a sense of the violence, the official death toll, as you quoted earlier, the official death toll from the cartel violence in Mexico is 60,000. This is more than the United States military lost in Vietnam. However, the unofficial death toll in Mexico is over 120,000 killed and another 27,000 missing and presumed dead. In Mexico, the cartels kill without hesitation or fear of prosecution. In May of this year, cartel members shot down a Mexican Army helicopter in the state of Jalisco. Why would we expect them to behave any differently on the U.S.-Mexico border? The second factor driving the increased violence is the rise of criminal aliens. When I first started in the Border Patrol, if you were a citizen of Mexico, we simply took down your information, took a single fingerprint, loaded you on a bus, and drove you to the border for repatriation. It was a revolving door border enforcement policy with cases where agents often arrested the same individual twice in the same shift. 3 positive developments, however, changed this. The first was the change in the way we collected information. Instead of just capturing one fingerprint, we began taking the prints of all 10 fingers and running the prints of those arrested against all criminal databases kept in the United States Department of Justice. We were then able to identify with certainty criminal aliens attempting to reenter the United States or to identify those who were arrested during interior patrol activities. The second positive step was the implementation of the various consequence delivery systems used in certain places along the border, and the third was Immigration and Customs Enforcement's criminal deportation program. I want to be very clear on this, especially given the recent incendiary comments about who is crossing the border and the assertions that the border is far safer than it has ever been. In 2014, ICE deported 177,000 convicted criminals. Of this number, 91,000 were arrested by the Border Patrol trying to illegally re-enter this country. To put this figure in perspective, in 2014, the Border Patrol apprehended and arrested just under 500,000 illegal immigrants, meaning that 1 in every 5 arrests last year by the Border Patrol was a criminal alien. Almost 50% of the criminal aliens deported in 2014 were convicted of aggravated felonies. These charges include murder, rape, sexual assault of a child, and drug and weapons trafficking. These are not petty criminals, and approximately 60% of those deported last year had already been deported at least once before. This is the challenge we are facing at the border today. There are those who will point to lower apprehension rates and tell you the border is secure. Border Patrol agents, however, throughout this nation will tell you the border is not secure and the southwest border certainly is not safe. We know what the problems are. What can we do to improve? First thing, increased manpower. Currently, there are 21,370 Border Patrol agents in this country, and that's actually what Congress mandates that we have. We're actually about 2,000 less under that. So we don't even have the floor that Congress has mandated that we maintain. We do not have to double the size of the Border Patrol to gain operational control of the border, but we are, in my opinion, approximately 5,000 agents short of where we should be. Secondly, supervisory staffing levels. The Border Patrol is an extremely top-heavy organization with far too many layers of management. The average large police department has 1 supervisor for every 10 officers. The Border Patrol has 1 supervisor for every 4 agents. The committee should mandate a 10-to-1 ratio and achieve it through attrition in supervisory ranks. This could easily return another 1,500 agents to the field. Because of time, I'm just going to point out the other points. We need to continue with interior enforcement, we need to improve our training, and we need to prosecute assaults against Border Patrol agents. In this manner, I believe that we will decrease the violence on the border and we will help to maintain border security. Thank you very much, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. I thank you all for your participation and your service to this country. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes to our 3 State Department witnesses. 4 people on this committee, myself, Elijah Cummings, Ron DeSantis, and Steve Lynch, sent a letter dated July 15, 2015. My question is, what percentage of the documents asked for in this letter has the Congress, this committee, have they been given? Ambassador Moser, do you know? I don't know the exact percentage. Can I use your microphone, please?
I don't know the exact percentage, sir. I do know that we have provided 150,000 pages of documents.
It doesn't matter unless we get the right percentage. So, Ms. Sarnio?
Sarnio.
What percentage?
Sir, I'm not aware of that. That would be in Ambassador Moser's
It's directed to Secretary Kerry. Mr. Starr, what percentage of the documents do we have?
I do not know, sir.
Should we issue a subpoena, Mr. Starr?
I believe that most of the documents are OBO-produced documents. I know that they're
Mr.
working hard
Ambassador Moser, is that true? Where are these documents?
Sir, we have a process for producing them, and I do want to assure you that I or members of my staff are more than happy to work with your staff in order to prioritize.
Well, we sent you a letter on July 15th, and you can't tell us that we got all the documents. So what do we need to do to get there? Do I need to issue a subpoena?
Sir, we will work with you to try to produce the documents that you require.
When will you have all those documents to us?
Sir, I can't tell you how fast the process will work.
That's for sure. I agree with you on that. I shouldn't have to waste any of my time asking for documents that we requested back in July, knowing that we were working towards a hearing on this date. Mr. Harris, of the border, the Secure Fence Act of 2006 defined operational control as, quote, the prevention of all unlawful entries into the United States, including entries by terrorists, other unlawful aliens, instruments of terrorism, narcotics, and other contraband, end quote. The goal of this was to achieve 100% operational control. Based on your knowledge, your experience, what percentage of the border today is secure?
Sir, I would have to defer to CBP to give a more detailed response to that question. In my current capacity, that's not within my area of focus.
Is there a metric that you all look for on that, or no?
Well, I'm really involved in counter-network operations, basically to work with the components across DHS.
Okay, so you don't have an answer to that question. Mr. Judd, what percentage of the border is under operational control?
According to the agents that I speak with that are actually on the front line, that actually work and see what we arrest and what gets away, I would say that we would be lucky if we're 40%.
Mr. Starr, one of the frontline people that, or some of the frontline people that we rely on, and for those Americans who are working at our consulates and certainly at the embassy, are the local guards. Do you know what we're paying those local guards on a monthly basis?
Congressman, I couldn't quote you an exact dollar figure. We did go over this with the new contract that we're putting in place. I would tell you that it's a competitive salary in terms of any other local guards in the country, and in fact, it probably is competitive with the police as well. But it is based on Mexican salaries.
And that's the concern, is that we're paying these local guards, at least what our staff has been told, roughly $316 per month is their monthly salary. And I recognize it's Mexico, it's not New York City. Wages are going to be different, but does that number sound about right, $316 per month for a local guard to guard our U.S. facilities?
Yes, sir. That's about the prevailing wage in Mexico.
The opportunity for corruption, I think you can see, is of great concern. I don't know what the magical number is, but Mr. Judd, I was going to ask you about the ratio of management and the agents that you need, but I think you've addressed that. One of the great concerns I have is getting these new facilities to secure our American personnel. I'm going to put up a slide here. To give a little background in history, we were operating under standard embassy design. This is something Secretary Powell put into place. But under the Obama administration with Secretary Clinton, they moved to this design excellence. And here's the concern. If you go to the second slide, Tijuana was built under standard embassy design. Is there anything wrong, Ambassador Moser, with the Tijuana facility? Is it too ugly for Mexico?
Not to my knowledge, sir. But in fact, it really wasn't a standard embassy design, sir. It was a derivative. It didn't really do the exact standard embassy
So we're
design.
spending about $668,000 per desk, but it's as close to standard embassy design as we have. But then we have these modified design excellence. Monterey was built. It jumped cost to $900,000 per desk. But the two under construction, Matamoros and Nuevo Laredo, we're now looking at $1.8 million per desk, and Nuevo Laredo at $1.7 million per desk. We're talking $191 million to build something in Matamoros and Nuevo Laredo at $154 million. How do you explain that? And by the way, in Matamoros, I'm sorry, Nuevo Laredo, $154 million. You start doing that math, you know, it's like 88 desks. How do we afford to do that around the world? And why do we have such a massive jump in expense? These expenses could go to personnel, guard forces, and you all want to take away danger pay. So why so much expense on these?
Sir, I acknowledge your concerns, and it is my obligation as a career State Department employee to make sure that we're doing our best to serve our taxpayers' concerns. I will tell you that over time, our security standards and our building quality has increased in order to adapt to actually new circumstances. And it's very hard without a detailed analysis that looks at site, where a building is located, what we're trying to accomplish in each of the building, to compare on a desk-by-desk basis.
Well, what other metric would you use?
As I've told you, it takes a more of an accounting approach where you look at what the inputs are and then gauge it to what
Yeah, well,
comes out.
that's costing tens of millions of dollars more, and it's taking a longer time. We will continue to have hearings about this. It is an outrageous amount of money, and it's taking longer. No doubt that we need new facilities. I do need to ask before I yield back about the danger pay. I'm not sure which one of the three to ask you about, but I guess, Ms. Sarnillo, we'll start with you. To what Mr. Cummings said, are people working for the State Department in Mexico, is there any threat of their wages going down by the loss of danger pay?
Congressman, thank you for that question. You know, I'm glad I get to answer this because I'm very proud of our Foreign Service colleagues.
Yeah, I know. We're all proud of them. Keep going. What's the answer to this question?
The
Are
answer-
you going to cut their pay?
The answer is that our allowances change over time as situations change. And yes, we have developed a new system by where we're changing danger pay and hardship pay. In Mexico, we're going to, the changes will be, some posts will go up and some posts will go down, but that reflects, we believe, the change in the situation on the ground. The danger pay that's been calculated in the past will, some of the elements of that, the criminal violence and living conditions, social isolation that you mentioned, those are also accounted for in hardship pay. And so if we look at the net pay for our colleagues, for example, our colleagues in Matamoros will be getting a 5% increase. Our colleagues in Nuevo Laredo and Tijuana will be going down by 5%. But we think that reflects the accurate situation.
So in Nuevo Laredo, there is no mayor that has authority over a police force there. We've documented the violence. Are you telling me it's more safe now in Nuevo Laredo than it has been?
Yes. By our calculations, it is.
The American Foreign Service Association takes great issue with this. You disagree with them and their analysis of this?
I'm a former board member of the American Foreign Service Association.
Yeah, they disagree with this position.
Well, I'm not so sure about the specific cases.
Well, I'll read you the quote. On the basis of conditions of environments which differ substantially from conditions of environments in the continental United States, it's a recruitment and retention incentive. My understanding is they disagree with this. You're telling me that in northern Mexico, it's less secure in Matamoros now and more secure in Nuevo Laredo?
So we believe the situation on the ground has changed and our allowances procedures.
In Nuevo Laredo, if you work at the consulate, do you know how far you can travel away from the consulate as an American?
I do. I'm aware of the situation.
Okay, how far can you travel?
You don't. You stay close by your home and your social life is very restricted. That's true. That's taken into consideration.
You have about 9 square miles that you can operate, that you are allowed to go, and you're going to decrease their pay.
So when Foreign Service officers sign up to go to these posts, they recognize that situations may change and the allowances may change in the time that they're serving there. It's part of the process, and we recognize it when we go to these posts.
I'm just telling you, you've got a lot of people on this panel that don't understand, given the massive amount of violence, the statistics that we just went through, particularly with Mr. Judd, the violence that's going on there, and you're going to decrease these people's pay? I went down there. It was the #1 issue. My time is well expired. This is not an acceptable conclusion to your so-called analysis. I do not agree that it is more safe than it has been, and it's an exceptionally difficult place to live. Yield to now. I now recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to pick up exactly where the Chairman left off. Ms. Sarnillo, how often are these reassessments made with regard to pay allowances? I see Mr. Starr is jumping up and down. You can answer. You may.
Ranking Member Cummings, if I could answer the question.
Please do.
At least once a year, we review the allowances at all of our posts. The danger pay that the Chairman is referring to, in August of 2014, we began a review of how we issued danger pay. We looked at also our hardship allowance.
Now, when was that?
In August of 2014.
Okay.
And it's been a continuing review. Our goal is to make sure that we have equitable implementation of our allowances across our entire world program. The global program includes posts that in many cases are much more dangerous than Matamoros or Nuevo Laredo. Yes, I absolutely admit there are high levels of violence in both of those places, but in our analysis it is very different that the violence there is not directed against the consulate or consulate personnel. They can be in the wrong place at the wrong time. We have many places in the world where we serve where the violence is directed against our people, and those are the places where our employees are getting danger pay. For the types of criminal violence that we see in Mexico, that is reflected in their hardship differential, and many of them have gotten increases in their hardship differential to reflect the criminal violence.
What would that, what do you define hardship as?
Hardship is, it looks at many different factors. It can look at isolation. It can look at pollution. It can look at the medical condition. It looks
The
at
9
crime.
square mile limitation would be
Exactly.
a hardship?
Exactly, sir. But I would also tell you that these posts in Mexico, our employees can get in a car and in 10 or 15 minutes be in the United States and across the border and shopping and going to school. We have people in places like Chad. We have places, Mali, and different places where no such types of outlet exist. And in those places, they're going to get a higher level of danger pay, if it exists, and they're going to get higher hardship differentials. We're very careful on how we look at this. We want to make sure that our people are getting the right allowances for the conditions on the ground.
Did you have something, Mr. Moser? Ambassador, I'm sorry. I think you'll find, Ms. Starr, that this is a bipartisan effort to try to make sure our people are treated fairly and that they are paid adequately. But when I thought about what Ms. Sarnillo said, she said a lot of times when these people go into these positions, they know what they're going into. I mean, I know that sounds simple, but when you're a person who really wants to serve your government, yeah, that may very well be part of the pay situation. You know what you're going into, but you're gonna. I mean, I assume that a lot of these people will take these positions. I mean, because it's a part of their job. Am I right, Madam?
Yes, I think many of the Foreign Services officers are willing and go to these posts knowing the dangers, but they also know that these allowances change over time when you're at post, and if the situation changes, they could be changed while they're serving there or after they leave.
So Mr. Starr said that you look at them about on a yearly basis. If something radical happened and there was a major problem, would there be any kind of exception to that general rule of 1 year? You follow me?
Congressman, not typically. I would tell you that when we have a radical change in a situation, we look at the measures that we take. We may implement additional security. We may withdraw personnel. We may take family members out of a post. Typically, the allowances are looked at once a year. On an exceptional basis, if something really does drastic happen, we can look at it, but generally, allowances are looked at once a year.
Now, Mr. Starr, in your testimony, going to another subject, you referenced a recent visit to some of the border consulates in Mexico. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I went early last month.
Now, would you describe for us the situation that our American personnel on the ground are experiencing? What are they?
I spent a great deal of time talking with our employees, both our local employed staff and our Americans. They are aware. They know the levels of violence that are going on around them. We are not having trouble staffing those posts. I also met with OSAC constituents, Americans that are working with American companies that are there, and talked with them as well. And I think it's very clear in our OSAC travel warnings that are out to the American businesses, American businessmen, and the consular warnings, we're not pulling any punches on the level of danger down in Mexico.
As a matter of fact, in Matamoros Consular District, there was a spike in crime in February. Is that right?
Exactly, sir. We looked at that almost daily as we began to see that two cartel, or actually subgroups within a cartel, were beginning to fight it out among each other in higher levels of violence. We were plotting every single day where the violence was taking place. We were looking at the location of our residences, the location of where we went shopping, the location of our facilities against where the violence was. We were ready to pull the pin and move people out if that violence came into our neighborhoods. But we look at those things almost daily when that level goes up.
So back then in February, there were 6 times as many incidents as compared to the month before. Is that right?
That's approximately right, sir, yes.
Now, did any of these security incidents involve U.S. citizens?
Yes, there were some U.S. citizens, not from the consulate, that were involved, but yes, there were U.S. citizens that were affected.
And so what you talked about how you were monitoring the problems, but what else has the State Department done or is doing to address that type of increase?
I think that's where the value of the consulates is most apparent, and the embassy as well. As we monitored the violence going up, we could play a role both through our consular offices and warning Americans and Americans that were working there. Through OSAC, we put out warnings. Our consul general was dealing with the governor of the region and talking with the police, the regional security officers talking with the police, and the ambassador and the others in Embassy Mexico City were pointing out that the levels of violence were going up and that the government needed to address this quickly and effectively. And soon after that, and I don't want to say that this is entirely just at our urging. Clearly, the government of Mexico understood this as well. They put additional forces on the ground to try to stem the violence.
Now, Mr. Harris, in June of this year, shots were fired at the U.S. Customs and Border Protection helicopter near Laredo, Texas. The shots appear to have come from the Mexican side of the border. Fortunately, no one was injured in this incident, but it does raise concerns about the safety of our federal law enforcement officers that are protecting the border. I understand that in response to Customs and Border Patrol, they sent 2 armored Black Hawk helicopters equipped to handle small arms fire to be used in the region. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And what else has been done to ensure the safety of the agents on the ground?
Well, first of all, before I answer the question, I'd like to say that a job of a Border Patrol agent is very dangerous work. We've had 122 agents, Border Patrol agents, killed in the line of duty since the Border Patrol was created in 1924. And DHS and CBP was created in 2003. And since that time, we've had 33 officers killed in the line of duty, and 29 of those were Border Patrol agents. So there's no question that being a U.S. Border Patrol agent is dangerous work. I think because we deal with a large population of economic migrants, but mixed in with those individuals are obviously some criminals. So it's important that our agents stay on their toes on a routine basis. We try and take a look at what we call hot spots, which are zones that are known for a high level of criminal activity, and make sure that we have sufficient agent resources and the equipment and the training and tactics in those areas to deal with those types of situations.
It's just two last questions. Mr. Harris, can you think of anything else Congress can do to help protect these brave men and women on our borders?
Well, first of all, we appreciate all the support that you all have given us. I would also like to point out on the helicopter shooting incident that Congressman Chaffetz responded to that situation, as he had referenced. It's just more stay engaged with the border. I think there's a lot of misinformation coupled with the border security efforts. So we welcome any visits by members of Congress to my new office so that you can see and hear what's going on the border firsthand.
And Mr. Starr, can you think of anything else we can do to help out on that end? And by the way, while you're formulating your answer, I just want you to know, Mr. Harris, on behalf of all of us, we understand how dangerous the job is, and we appreciate everything that you all do to address the issues that you have, because they are very difficult. and we're sorry for the many losses and injuries that you just spoke about. Mr. Starr?
Congressman, I believe that what we need to accept is that the battle to increase security, rule of law, and justice in Mexico is going to be a long-term battle. I think that we can see what has happened in Colombia and the types of improvements that have been made there, and I think those are the types of improvements that we're going to have to help Mexico make. I think Das Sarnio could probably talk more effectively about this in terms of the programs that we have in place. But I think continuing those types of programs that we started in Colombia and we're currently running in Mexico to improve the judicial system, the training of the police, all of those types of things are what's ultimately going to make this a safer location, safer country.
Thank you very much.
Before the gentleman yields back, I'll point out that there is no police force in Nuevo Laredo. There is none. So you can work on training them, but there isn't even one. It's run by the drug cartels. And shame on the State Department for cutting the people's pay there from the State Department. That's not the way you're going to build morale and do more things. You're given tens of billions of dollars and you're going to cut those poor people's pay. You can talk about training the local police force, but there isn't even a local police force to train.
Mr. Chairman, reclaiming my zero time. Mr. Starr, would you please answer what Mr. Chairman Chaffetz just said?
Chairman Chaffetz,
I think he makes a good point.
Chairman Chaffetz is correct, to my knowledge, that the local police force is actually not functioning there. But there are levels of police forces as well. There are police from the governors, from that governorate. It's like a state type of police. And there are federal police as also there and soldiers. So I think while Chairman Chaffetz is correct that we have great concerns about the fact that the mayor was murdered, that the local police have tremendous difficulties, we also work with the federal and state authorities to ensure that other types of security services and police are effectively as effective as they can.
I'd ask unanimous consent to enter into the record. This is the United States Department of State, Bureau of Diplomatic Security, Mexico 2015 Crime and Safety Report, Nuevo Laredo, into the record. Without objection, so ordered. Now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mica.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding the hearing. First of all, I'll get to, before we get to Mr. Judd, but has the situation gotten worse? Is the violence just as bad in Mexico as it's been? Mr. Starr, what do you say?
The violence in Mexico ebbs and flows, sir, as
but right now it's...
In certain places, it's better than it was a year or 2 or 3 years ago. In certain places, it's certainly worse.
So, yeah. Mr. Ambassador Mosier.
I would point out that if you look at, I'm not an expert on Mexico, but Congressman Mica.
Overall, it's not getting much better. Is that right?
I think there's ebbs and flows. There are parts of Mexico like Ciudad Juarez that are safer now than they were before.
But overall, it's still a pretty violent country.
Yes.
Same thing, same assessment?
Actually, sir, I would say that we are cautiously optimistic that we think the situation is somewhat better in certain parts of the country, and that's reflected in our danger pay changes. We've seen parts of the country that were close to insurgency status a few years ago that are actually operating a lot better now, and a lot of that.
And there are places that are worse.
That's true. There are places that are worse.
Thank you. Mr. Harris?
Similar response. I would say it depends on the area. I travel to Mexico on a personal basis and professional level. Some areas you travel with security and others you don't. But overall, dangerous place, no question.
Dangerous place. Well, I've read all the testimonies. Mr. Judd, I think every member of Congress should read yours. I think it's an incredible assessment. Also a bit historic. I chaired criminal justice and drug policy from 1998 to 2000 and was in Mexico. And we had information at that time from the President's office to the cops on the street. Corruption was prevalent. And unfortunately, that's pretty much the same situation that we have today. But your report details it very well. startling is the number of 2014, you outline the number of criminals, convicted criminals, and you cite the increasing number of criminal aliens coming across and how we're better able to detect them, but the numbers are astounding. It says, to put the figure in perspective, 2014, the Border Patrol apprehended and arrested just under 500,000 illegal immigrants, meaning 1 in every 5 arrests last year was a criminal alien. Is that correct?
From the research that we've done in the statistics.
So to get arrested, they had to be in and caught, right?
That is correct, yes, sir.
That's absolutely astounding. Simple math, it's probably 100,000 criminal aliens entering the United States. Basically, it's out of control. And then you said that what can the Oversight Committee do to improve? You said there has to be consequences, right?
Absolutely.
And there are consequences. I was stunned to find out the fact that Mexico is one of the most important illegal immigrant and narcotics transit point in the country. And how many agents do we have in Phoenix?
We have none.
None? You know, the other thing, too, is there has to be consequences. How many consulates do we have? I counted about 9 in Mexico. Is that right? I think we should close every one of those consulates immediately, put the property up for sale. I think you have to have some consequences for actions. The place is out of control. I just read, well, you cited the helicopter shooting at a U.S. helicopter, right? And Chairman Chaffetz had helped on that, Mr. Harris. I didn't know that, and in your report, I think, Mr. Judd, you said they actually shot down a Mexican helicopter the month before. Is that correct?
Yes, they did.
And most startling, we heard the chairman's, one of the missionaries down there shot yesterday. The 43 kids that were turned over by local authorities and shot or killed, and then their bodies burned or destroyed. And this week or so, I guess ago, they just produced sort of a whitewash report on what took place. And one of the leaders, Mr. Jimenez Blanco, was found dead about 2 weeks ago. He was interviewed by CNN just a couple of weeks ago and said that last week, Jimenez told CNN, Mexico, more than 100 bodies had been found hidden in graves in the area since October, decrying a worsening security situation. So it doesn't sound like it's getting much better. They're even killing the people who are trying to do something about the injustice and slaughter that's going on in Mexico. Is that correct, Mr. Judd?
Yes, it is. And what I find the scariest part of all of this border violence is how it's extending now into the interior of the United States. We just had a young man shot in the back by presumed an illegal alien from the country of El Salvador, associated with the Mara Salvatrucha gang. We just had a U.S. citizen in San Francisco who was just killed. So we're not only seeing violence on the border, but this is extending into the United States, and that's scary.
And finally, Mr. Chairman, I read this week, I think most of the illegal marijuana is still coming in from Mexico, but congratulations, we just passed this past week, I saw the report that our young people, our students, more of them are now hooked on marijuana than on cigarettes. Congratulations.
Now I recognize the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all of the panelists and ranking member for calling this truly important hearing. And Mr. Judd hit it right on the head with his comment that it's not only on the border now, it is coming into the United States. Just this past week, a news reporter and her cameraman were shot. A police officer putting gas in his car was shot. A woman from Illinois was shot. The incidents that you mentioned. And as Mr. Starr said, it's going to be a long effort on the border. And as my colleague, Mr. Micah, mentioned, it is out of control. And I would like to point out that a lot of this shooting is coming from guns that were manufactured and slipped over the border into Mexico. In fact, Mexico has some of the most restrictive gun laws in the entire world, yet it's seeing a tremendous surge in gun-related violence. Just yesterday, Chairman Cummings shared with me this letter that was sent to him from the Charge d'Affaires of Mexico, Alejandro Estravil. And in it, he says that the ATF found that over 70% of the guns recovered in Mexico in 2014 were sourced from the United States. Now, that is a shocking statistic. 70% of the guns came from America. And in it, he further writes, and I quote, "Congress can play a very important role in combating these transborder criminal organizations and the flow of illegal firearms by enacting proper legislation," end quote. I ask unanimous permission to put this letter into the record, Mr. Cummings and Mr. Chaffetz.
Without objection, so ordered.
And we are trying to do just that. Earlier today, in a bipartisan way, Ranking Member Cummings and others, a member Kelly from Illinois, introduced legislation to make it a felony to deal with illegal guns, to be a trafficker. It's not even a felony in our country to traffic in illegal guns. I would say, how dumb can you be? We should pass a bill making it a felony tomorrow, today. And also the penalties, as we've heard in hearings before this committee on the fast and furious hearings we had from law enforcement, they don't even bother to arrest traffickers or straw purchasers, those who purchase guns for others that are known criminals or drug dealers or gang leaders, because there's no penalty. It's like a paper penalty, so they don't waste their time doing it. And they literally pled with us to give them the tools to do the job. So today we are introducing this bill in a bipartisan way that would increase penalties for straw purchasers and make trafficking in illegal guns a felony. Now in Mexico, just to give an example, to make a purchase in a gun store, and they only have one gun store in the whole country, but to make a purchase, they are required by law, and their store is operated by the Army. They must pass a background check, present identification, pass through a metal detector, hand over cell phones, a camera, just to enter the building. And once inside, a prospective buyer is fingerprinted, photographed, and then permitted to buy a single weapon and a box of ammunition, and they're required to take that home and put it under lock and key. So they have strong gun laws, but the obvious question is, where are all these guns coming from? And these guns are coming from the United States. And Mr. Harris, in your testimony, you said, and I quote from your testimony, the U.S.-Mexican border, the primary threats are southbound gun smuggling, northern-bound drug trafficking, human trafficking, illegal immigration, and the violence associated with these activities. Could you elaborate, please, Mr. Harris, on the southbound gun smuggling? How big is it? Can you tell us more about this gun smuggling?
Yes, ma'am. I'll answer that question in kind of two parts. One is what my role is in southbound weapons smuggling at a strategic level. As I had also mentioned in my testimony, for the first time ever, we have identified across the border the top transnational criminal organizations who are involved in the full gamut of smuggling activities, which you had listed. I would add southbound bulk cash smuggling to that list as well. But this is to me is a huge accomplishment never before seen in my career. All investigative agencies, whether FBI, DEA, ICE, they all have their cases that they work. But for the first time ever, we have interagency agreement on which top criminal organizations we believe represent the highest threat to U.S. national security. Some of those organizations are involved in southbound weapons smuggling. Our success on targeting these organizations before this has pretty much been on the domestic side. But this new position gives me the capability to target these organizations all the way from the origination point to the final destination point. That's one part of the.
How many guns do you think are being trafficked into Mexico each year? Do you have any feel for it?
Well, second part of my answer will respond to that. I'm not an expert at port of entry operations. I'll have to defer to my CBP counterpart. However, from my former capacity as the Border Patrol Chief in Laredo, we routinely augment southbound inspections by OFO officers with detailed Border Patrol agents. I would say, by and large, our success in targeting southbound weapons smuggling is due to the vigilance and capabilities of our agents. As I'm sure you know, we do not have the same kind of technology going southbound that we have going northbound, nor do we do 100% southbound inspections. We do pulse and surge operations and operations based on intelligence and investigative information, but largely the southbound weapons seizures are cold hits. It would be helpful to have some similar technology going southbound to what we have going northbound. The non-intrusive inspection technology, some of the backscatters would be very instrumental, and I think that would give us a better picture of what kind of weapons are going southbound.
Thank the gentleman.
My time has expired, but if I could say, Mr. Chairman, in 1 second, obviously part of controlling the crime in America and at the border is controlling the sale of illegal gun trafficking and straw purchases of illegal guns.
Thank you.
Thank
We now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I get started, Ms. Maloney points out in her call for more gun laws here in Texas or in the United States that Mexico has some of the strictest gun laws and yet has the high violence. I think that just goes to make the point that restrictive gun laws actually take guns out of the hands of law-abiding citizens and put them into the hands of criminals.
Will the gentleman yield?
I don't have much time. If I do at the end, I will.
Okay,
I have some points I'd like to make because I used to represent the border at Brownsville and joined Mr. Chaffetz in June in his visit to Laredo after the helicopter was shot at. Had the opportunity to visit with some of the Border Patrol agents down there. Real quickly, while I get started, Mr. Harrison, have we caught the people who shot at the helicopter? Or have the Mexican government caught them?
Well, the FBI is responsible for investigating all assaults on federal agents. They're responsible for that investigation. It's my understanding that an individual was taken into custody. He was transported to Tampico, where he went before a judge, but he's now missing.
Well, that's reassuring. One of the things that I learned down there in visiting with some of the Border Patrol agents and actually spending some time on the border with some of the agents was a level of frustration with some of the policies that this government has that makes it difficult for to do their jobs. You know, I hear it referred to as catch and release, or a policy that if there are only a certain number of illegal aliens in a vehicle, the coyote or human smuggler is not prosecuted and is let go, or a frustration with seeing the same folks again and again. They're caught, they're shooed across the border, counted as a deportation, and are back in the United States in a matter of hours. In fact, I visited with some of the sheriffs in the district I represent, you know, Sheriff T. Michael O'Connor in Victoria, or Frank Osborne, Matagorda County, and Jess Howell of Wharton, and they're all very upset and concerned about the priority enforcement program, in which case very often the federal government refuses to take illegal aliens that they apprehend for deportation. Mr. Judd, I'll start with you. Can you talk a little bit about, was my characterization of the frustration of the rank-and-file agents accurate?
I think it was too soft. I think that you could have expressed a much greater level of frustration. I want to point out that on the northern border, there was an arrest made of an illegal alien in the Havre Border Patrol sector. We took this individual into custody. We immediately released the individual on the street. Within weeks, that individual went up to, I believe it was Great Falls, Montana, and raped a 14-year-old girl. We had this individual in our custody. We had the authority to remove this individual from this country, and we didn't do it. And then that individual went and raped a 14-year-old girl. Her life will never be the same.
And we see this again and again with the tragic murder of Kate Steinle, the shooting of the Border Patrol agents in the Rio Grande Valley by a pair of men who had been between them deported, I think, 7 times. And there was a story in the news, I think it was just in the past couple of days, where a convicted burglar from Mexico with a history of repeated felony convictions and deportation was caught last week. He was the 5th time he'd crossed the border and had actually spent the bulk of the past 30 years in various jails. It just seems absolutely critical that we get the border secured. No point working on immigration before we get that done. Mr. Harris, can you talk a little bit about the Priority Enforcement Program, the PEP, and have you heard from the sheriffs as well about their concern that they catch somebody, an illegal alien, and basically have nothing to do with them but turn them loose? We just defunded sanctuary cities in this country, but with PEP and the Border Patrol not taking aliens sheriff calls, we've basically created a sanctuary country, haven't we?
I'll answer that question again in 2 parts. One is, as was noted in my testimony, I've been in the Border Patrol for 31 years. I've been in the Border Patrol when we made up to 1.6 million apprehensions a year with about 3,000 agents on duty. Most of those individuals were from the country of Mexico. Very easy to deal with those individuals. It was a revolving door type of a situation, as Mr. Judd had indicated earlier, but the border dynamics have changed over my career from what it was. About 42% of everyone we apprehend is from a non-contiguous territory, most of those being from Central America and a lot of them being women and children. So it's a different kind of a dynamic on how we deal with those individuals, and about 33% of everybody the Border Patrol arrests has to go before some kind of an immigration judge or an immigration proceeding. So the Border Patrol does not own all of the process necessary, nor am I seeking that ownership, but it does not own all of the process that would allow for immediate repatriation of those individuals. The second part of my response, again, is what my job is really to target the criminal network from beginning to end. That does not necessarily mean that we're targeting criminal aliens throughout the United States as part of my job, but I'll just give you one example. I think ICE Fugitive Operations does a great job of picking up criminal aliens, and when I first stepped into this job, they had just done a press event where they had arrested about 2,000 criminal aliens throughout the country. No
but your job would be, and your men's job would be easier if there were consequences to entering this country illegally, and folks were deported and there's faced consequences for multiple offense. Mr. Judd, Mr. Harris, just a yes or no. Would that be a better situation? Because I'm out of time.
Yes.
Were you with us on that one, Mr. Harris?
Excuse me, sir?
You think it would be better if we had some consequences and repatriated folks?
Well, I think every law enforcement officer, regardless of what their profession is, when they take an action, they want to see some sort of a consequence delivered, but a little bit more challenging with the population we're dealing with.
Thank you, and my time has expired, and I apologize to the gentlelady from New York and not being able to yield to her.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This discussion about undocumented criminals, violence, of course, on the border, raises the question for me of the role that consulates play with respect to security, particularly in northern Mexico. Now, as I understand it, Mr. Starr, the security agencies, the law enforcement agencies, are coordinated or facilitated through the consulate. I have in mind Customs and Border Protection, Drug Enforcement Agency, Immigration, of course, and Customs Enforcement, Marshal Service. Is the consulate the place where these agencies would be stationed?
Ma'am, I can't say that every single one of those agencies is at every single one of the consulates, but you are correct that the consulates do serve as a base for consular operations and for those types of operations, along with the embassy in Mexico.
Yes, Mr. Starr, what I'm trying to get at is, you know, the average American, if you say, what's a consulate for, would think about visas and tourism and the rest. We're talking about violence, undocumented criminals and the rest, and I'm trying to get at what we're doing on the ground in Mexico through our consulates and the role they play. Now, the United States, I think, Mr. Starr, has wisely tried to involve itself in reform of the criminal justice system in Mexico itself in order to truly get at drug trafficking, gun trafficking, organized crime, which of course is always at the top of our agenda. And I'd like to ask you in that regard about the so-called Madeira initiative, which, as I understand it, is charged with disrupting criminal organizations, strengthening judicial institutions in Mexico, improving stability in the surrounding communities. Ms. Sarnio, Mr. Starr, does that sound like what the Madeira initiative is about?
Yes, thank you, Representative, for bringing that up. I really appreciate you mentioning that, because what we're talking about is the Merida initiative. It's our security initiative with Mexico. We've been working with Mexico extensively since 2008. We've invested about $1.4 billion right now in trying to improve the security situation in Mexico by working with the Mexican government at the federal, state, and local levels. And we actually have seen areas where we have made progress, and we think a lot of that progress is because of our presence on the ground. If we're working in Ciudad Juarez or in Tijuana or in Monterrey, our law enforcement officials, our military officials can work with Mexican counterparts to give them advice, to lend assistance when they need it, to provide training when possible. And it's because of the funding provided by Congress, which we're very grateful for, where we've been able to actually make some inroads and help Mexico establish the rule of law in the system that they are seeking.
What impact would closing the consulates have on an initiative like the Merida initiative?
I think it would be very tragic not to have our colleagues down there in Mexico. They work very well every day on a daily basis with counterparts all over the country. And
is the consulate where they're based?
They're based at the embassy primarily, but they're also based in several of our consulates, yes. Mm-hmm. So in some of the cases where we've had the most success, it's where our officials were working locally with the officials locally. So yes, it would have an impact, and I think it would be detrimental to not have.
What impact has it had so far on security in the region?
Well, we believe that a strong presence of our consulates actually helps establish the security. Not only are we providing for the security of American officials, American citizens who are there, but we also can work with local authorities and, as I said, to help them rebuild their institutions and help the Mexican government achieve what it's seeking to do. Our colleagues are really working all over the country all the time with the Mexican government, and we're trying to help them achieve their goals.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Starr, earlier in your opening remarks, you said environments such as that in Mexico involve constantly shifting threats that require comprehensive planning, agile decision-making, and deft diplomacy. You went on to say, but it's simply not enough to improve physical security. We're also training the Foreign Service community on how to better respond in these environments. Since 2008, the State Department has had a plan to build a diplomatic security training center. And included in that has been the curriculum, the infrastructure, and the personnel. Both the OMB and the GAO have come out with reports on this. And during those studies, and those studies that the OMB and the GAO have come out with, the OMB report has not been released. I have seen the OMB report, and my staff has seen the GAO report. Both of those reports cite the lack of cooperation by the State Department in trying to come up with proposals for this facility to be built. Can you tell me on a facility that's this important, on a facility that's this expensive, why the State Department would be uncooperative in addressing this? Can you tell me why FLETC, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, was only given 60 days to respond to this? Don't you think that they deserve more than 60 days? Don't you think the taxpayers of this country deserve to know exactly, apples and apples, what's going to be the best facility? What are we going to get the most from our taxpayers' dollars there? Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir, I would. I believe that it's clear that spending money on something that doesn't meet our requirements is not going to be a good investment. In previous hearings and in previous discussions with FLETC, they could not take our entire program and don't have the facilities that we need for the types of weapons that we use at the FLETC facility. They proposed using the Townsend bombing range, which is about 60 miles north of FLETC. That is a Marine Corps bombing range that is at the moment under consideration from going from a non-live munition bombing range to a live munition bombing range.
I understand that, Mr. Stahl.
If I could. They can't use it. And therefore, we believe that the Fort Pickett site is the best, but
Mr. Starr, let me ask you, Mr. Starr, did you make this clear to FLETC? Do you think that they had all the information? Because when you talk about the curriculum requirements for the training center, both in the OMB report and the GAO report, and I quote here, it says, the course information is only in the minds of the instructors, and providing it would cause a significant delay in diplomatic security operation. How can we get a price on the curriculum? How can we get an idea when it's only in the minds of the instructors?
I'm sorry, sir, that's not correct. We have extensive
This comes right out of the report.
We have extensive records. We have provided the curriculum. We have, this is not just in the mind of instructors, sir. Every
Then
course
why is that in the report? Why not? And can I ask you,
Sir,
Mr. Starr, I have seen the report. Mr. Starr, I've seen the report.
Which
okay?
report, sir?
The OMB report, which you have denied to be released. I found nothing in there sensitive whatsoever. There were 6 comparisons done. FLETC came out on top with 3 of those comparisons. 2 of them were even, and 1 of them favored Fort Pickett. Can you tell me why that report's not being released?
Sir, the OMB report is a preliminary study.
Why is it not being released?
I don't know, sir. That's an OMB report. I can tell you that the GAO report does not reflect that. The GAO report has been finished. It has not been released yet either. I think that it's probably wise to wait until that report is released.
Mr. Starr, you'd agree this is important. Protecting the lives of our Foreign Service members are very important. Protecting their lives and training is very important. We all agree with that. You know, this is easy. This is easy when we sit here, and when we sat here a couple of months ago and talked about Afghanistan and said, hey, we spent too much money. We should have, could have, would have. But what's not easy is to do something about it and to learn from it and to have an apples-to-apples comparison. You need to go back. You need to compare the 2 sites, compare them fairly. If you're right, then I will be the first one in line to support you in that. But I'm telling you, you have not done that yet. The State Department has made up their mind. They're not going to change their mind. It can only be built near Washington, D.C., because after all, everything comes from Washington, D.C. That's the only way it can ever work. Mr. Starr, this is not right. You need to go back. You need to make it apples-to-apples comparisons. If we sit here and we say we shouldn't have spent this much money, but we don't learn from it, and we don't do something about the future, then we're all at fault here. Mr. Chairman, I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Cartwright, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thank all the witnesses for coming today. This is an enormously important discussion we're having. We heard from you, Mr. Harris, and particularly from you, Mr. Judd, some really vivid testimony about the level of violence that we're seeing connected with the border. And the level of criminal that we're seeing at the border. But really, Chairman Chaffetz called this hearing in large measure to talk about whether we ought to close those 3 consulates that he discussed. And actually, my colleague, Mr. Mica, is calling for the closure of all 9 consulates in Mexico. And what I didn't get from you, Mr. Harris, or you, Mr. Judd, was the nexus between that discussion and the discussion of the level of violence that you've been talking about. How does it cut? Starting with you, Mr. Harris, how would closing these 3 consulates that Chairman Chaffetz is talking about, how would that cut on the violent situation there?
Well, sir, first of all, let me just say I'm not familiar with the criteria that was referenced on the, on the office and the pay systems and all that. I'll just say that in terms of my business, our relationship with Mexico and our ability to protect and promote U.S. interests is critically important to border security. I routinely travel to Mexico, work with the State Department and all of the country team in Mexico City. So having our people deployed in a way that we can best protect and promote the interest of the United States is critically important.
Mr. Judd?
When I came to testify, on, about violence on the border and keeping U.S. personnel safe.
Yeah.
As far as the Mexican consulates go, I have no idea how to do that. All I can tell you is I am an expert in border security and what comes across the border and how we can better promote operations to effectively secure the border, and that's what I'm trying to give testimony on.
Okay, so that's kind of a separate discussion that you gentlemen are giving us. But I appreciate your coming, and those are sobering comments that both of you gave us. In February of this year, in fact, right at the time of the spike of the violence at Matamoros area, I spent some time with my dear friend and colleague, Congressman Philemon Vela, in South Texas. In fact, we were right across the border from Matamoros at the time in February. I met with individuals from CBP who work tirelessly to ensure that our border is secure. Most notably, and something that almost never gets mentioned, is that it's keeping our border secure from insects that would infiltrate our American crops. And I thank you for all the work in that regard. I witnessed how vitally important our trade relationship is with Mexico. The U.S. is Mexico's largest foreign investor. More than 18,000 U.S. companies operate in Mexico. My state of Pennsylvania exports $3.44 billion worth of goods to Mexico every year. So that accounts for 246,409 Pennsylvania jobs. So this is a subject of interest to me. On my trip, I learned about the role of the maquiladoras, the factories, where Mexican workers assemble products for foreign companies. Most are U.S.-owned or subsidiaries and employ American managers and engineers, many of whom work in the Mexican maquiladoras as managers, middle managers by day, and then come back over the border to places like McAllen, Texas, where they live. Our working relationship with Mexico is enormously important to our economic security, and as I witnessed, the work of the consulates is vital to that mission. Now, Ms. Sarnio, in your testimony, you recognize the importance of the bilateral relationship between the U.S. and Mexico. You stated, quote, two-way trade topped $500 billion in 2014, with 80% of that crossing the U.S.-Mexico land border. Ms. Sarnio, how do U.S. consulates facilitate our trade relationship with Mexico?
Thank you, Congressman. That's an excellent question. Our consulates are very active with the business community on the ground in dealing with both security issues, but also in promoting the trade and the business that goes back and forth. The U.S. and Mexico share this very close North American trading relationship, and it's gotten deeper in the last 20 years after NAFTA. And I have to say that I think our consulates, besides providing daily contact with the American companies there, they support business documents need to be signed. They need to be notarized. They need to help moving freight across the border. If something gets stopped because of the lack of paperwork or something, they'll work with them to help facilitate and make that trade more efficient on a daily basis. Our consulates are very active in working with that, and it is my understanding the business community is very supportive of an active presence by the consulates in those regions. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hurd, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank my colleague from Pennsylvania, Mr. Cartwright, in highlighting the problems of insects on the border. It's a real problem and something we deal with all the time. I represent over 820 miles of the border from Eagle Pass, Piedras Negras on the Mexican side, to El Paso and Ciudad Juarez on the Mexican side, with Beto O'Rourke, Philemon Vela, and Henry Cuellar. We represent all of the Texas border. So this is something that we engage in on a weekly basis. And I don't have much time. And so my first question is to you, Mr. Judd, and I'm going to try to keep our little tete-a-tete tight. We've spent a lot of time here discussing the violence on the border and the danger of the border, and that's expanding in the interior. I was down the border last week in Ojinaga and Presidio, and I know one of the challenges I heard a lot was the lack of manpower in some of these locations, especially a place like Presidio. Can you tell us a little bit about what this means from an operations perspective, and if you can keep that answer tight?
Absolutely. Without the manpower on the border, we can't properly, we just physically can't secure the border. We need men and women on the border to do that. When you have specific areas like Presidio, where the living conditions are absolutely horrendous, it's nearly impossible to keep agents in that area, and so we need to do something. It was interesting that a couple years ago, they took away the designation from Presidio.
You're reading my mind, brother. And so my understanding that some of these locations have changed their status from hardship posts, and I've seen a disproportionate share of agents leave or simply transfer out. Part of the move away from hardship designation was an effort to save money. Is the union open to some form of solution that would allow an agent to move up in terms of eligibility or preference for the next post if they spend a certain amount of time in a hardship posting?
We've been pushing the agency for that, and unfortunately, they haven't reciprocated.
Excellent. I think we're going to have some more conversations on that. Mr. Starr, Ambassador Moser, I want to thank you all and your organizations and your predecessors for what you do. I spent 9 years as an undercover officer in the CIA. I was in some really dangerous places like Pakistan, Afghanistan, and I've been in embassies that have been bombed. I've been in embassies that have been shot up. I've been in embassies where thousands of people have marched on it, and because of the work of y'all two organizations, you had Mama Hurd's youngest son come home. So I appreciate that and what you do. My only real concern is the cost of some of these embassies. Texas A&M University built a 110,000-seat stadium for about $450 million. I think there's some expertise we can rely on there. But one of the problems that I actually have, and what I appreciate that you all do with the travel advisory in Mexico, the advisory in Mexico is the only advisory where you all split it up by state, right? And I think that shows the important relationship that we have with Mexico. We can't secure our border. I know Mr. Judd and his colleagues are working hard every single day, and we can facilitate the movement of goods and services at the same time. We must, and that's super important. So Juarez, 2008, murder capital of the world. 2010, it's half as many murders as Detroit and New Orleans. Ojinaga, right? There's less murders in Ojinaga than there are in 2014 than there were in Baltimore. So my concern is when we talk about Mexico is a big place. 80% of the violence is in 20% of the country, and if you break that, that's about 5 states, and if you break that down into municipalities, it's about 20 municipalities out of hundreds. And I get frustrated when we try to talk about Mexico as one place. and it's not. And so I'm just looking to work with y'all on making sure that the travel advisories in some of these cities are reflective of the needs on the ground. And I made a comment when I was in Ojinaga. I was like, I've been in some pretty dangerous places, and Ojinaga is not one of them. And I'm looking, just for y'all's opinion on being able to ensure that those travel advisories are reflective of those communities. Because on the border, it's not two communities, it's one community. And the importance of trade and people, goods and services going back and forth is so critical to this country. What's good for northern Mexico is good for southern United States, and it's good for both countries. And, Mr. Starr, your comments, please.
Thank you, Congressman. Specifically to that topic, both OSAC and the warnings that we work with from each individual consulate and the OSAC country councils and the city councils that we have look specifically at the areas. The consular warning sheets are countrywide, but there are also post-security bulletins that come out from the consulate. And I think this is one of the arguments for why we have consulates in different places. American citizens can go to that website for each individual consulate and look at what's going on in that immediate area. I recognize that, yes, sometimes the consular warning sheets are a rather blunt tool because we have, I think, Sue, was it over 25 million Americans a year visit Mexico, and we do have to give them sort of honest, open advice. But we also further break it down for those people that are in specific areas, and we try to do that. But I will take your concerns back with me.
Thank you very much. And my last point, and I'm already over time, I apologize, Chairman, Ms. Sarnillo, please communicate to the members of the Foreign Service. They're sometimes overlooked at the difficulty in their job. They're doing it in hard places. They're working hard every single day to export our soft power around the world, and they do it in tough places. I recognize that. I had the honor of serving side by side with many of those. Thank you for what you do, and please communicate that back. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. We'll now recognize Ms. Kelly for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Everyone here today would agree that the Mexican government must work to enhance security in their country. The violent crime that takes place in some places in Mexico, taking into consideration what my colleague just said, often resonates across the border here in the United States and simply cannot be ignored. We know that American firearms often turn up at crime scenes in Mexico. In March, the AFT reported that out of 104,850 guns traced between 2009 and 2014, 70% originated in the United States. Mr. Harris, I'm sure that Customs and Border Patrol encounters many guns at the border. Do you agree that the consistent flow of firearms from the U.S. across the border to Mexico is a serious problem?
Yes, ma'am. I had responded to a previous question. I think our men and women do a great job on southbound inspections. The OFO personnel who are doing sometimes random southbound inspections are oftentimes augmented by Border Patrol agents detailed over to assist with that effort. And the firearms that are seized during southbound operations without the aid of intelligence or investigative information are largely due to the hard work of the men and women. However, as I'm sure you know, we do not have the same level of technology and inspection capabilities going southbound as we have northbound, and I think if we would have some similar technology, the backscatters and other non-intrusive inspection capabilities to augment the great work of the men and women on southbound inspections, probably help us to do a better job of seizing more weapons going into Mexico, which, as you indicate, is a problem.
Thank you. In 2008, the Mexican ambassador to the United States pled with the U.S. to do something to help stem the flow of weapons into his country, saying, and I quote, "Between Texas and Arizona alone, you've got 12,000 gun shops along that border with Mexico, and a lot of these gun shops provide weapons that feed into organized crime in Mexico. So we really need the support of the United States." Ms. Sarnillo, do you agree with that? American firearms are contributing to the violence within Mexico or some parts of Mexico?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think the problem of violence in Mexico and as it crosses over the United States is a problem that we share with Mexico. We share a common border. We share many issues. They're multifaceted issues. I think we have to deal with problems on our side of the border, and the Mexicans have to deal with problems on their side of the border, and we do work very closely with them on it. But I am sure that if we were to deal with some of these issues in our side, they would be appreciated in Mexico.
This is a tremendous problem because one of the principal tactics used by criminals to obtain these weapons is straw purchasing. And I know my colleagues have already raised this issue, and I'm proud to join Ranking Member Cummings and Congressman Carolyn Maloney to introduce the Bipartisan Gun Trafficking Prevention Act of 2015, House Resolution 3455. I feel this bill would close this glaring loophole and would help with the issue. So thank you, and I yield back.
I'd like to make a note here that from Homeland Security, Customs and Border Patrol, this is the number of seizures of guns on the southwest border in 2015, 60, 60, that's it. If you look at the ATF statistic, some 8,200 traces in a category called U.S.-sourced firearms. I want to be careful because U.S. source, under the definition provided by the ATF, refers to those firearms that were determined by ATF to be manufactured in the United States or legally imported into the United States by an FFL, a Federal Firearms Licensee. So legal transportation of it, they may have been used in a crime, but if they were manufactured in the United States, they would also fall into that statistic. So I think it is a little bit high. And if anybody on this panel is concerned about the illegal flow of guns, then you've got to look first at what the Obama administration did in Fast and Furious. And this panel, this Oversight Committee, asked for the documents from the State Department and from others about the operation, from the Department of Justice, I should say, about Fast and Furious. Did the administration work with us in an open and candid way? No. Did the administration provide the documents to Congress? No. We had to take them to court. In fact, that is still pending because the government, through the Department of Justice, knowingly and willingly gave the drug cartels nearly 2,000 weapons. So we can drag up Mr. Holder and other people in the Obama administration, but they gave out nearly 2,000 AK-47s to the drug cartels, and we want to look at that. We had to hold the Attorney General in contempt of Congress. We had to actually go to the courts to try to get those documents. We still don't have those documents. So for people to say, oh, we're worried about the drugs or the guns that are going back and forth, let's look at what our government did in a complicit way to provide the drug cartels those weapons. That is an investigation this committee will continue. It's still in the courts, and it's one of the most outrageous things to happen. So I would actually agree with the gentlewoman. But it shouldn't start with our government knowingly giving those weapons to the drug cartels. Thanks, everybody, for their indulgence. I now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your passion on this issue. I want to talk a little bit about, go direction concerning human trafficking and human smuggling, if I could. And I want to tie it into the border crossing cards. I have a question. What are the risks of these thieves that are able to duplicate these cards? Is that possible over the 11,500 that were made? Because I have a card here as well, and it's a card that I use here in D.C. Sometimes I will use it to vote. Other times I just show it, and I'm kind of granted access here. So help me understand. Can that be duplicated?
Sir, they have features in them that make it very difficult to do a photo substitution or duplicate them. I think the other thing that's important to remember on the cards that were stolen, that anybody that's actually trying to do illegal activity would not want to use one of those cards that was stolen because every one of those is registered electronically as a stolen card now. So if they go to the border and show it, it automatically rings a bell, and these people are going to be doubly inspected. So we have a high degree of confidence that the cards that were stolen, the majority have been recovered. Those that haven't been, very difficult to duplicate, and likely that the cartels or anybody else, excuse me, engaged in illegal business would not want to use them.
And the RFID can be turned off remotely. So are we under the impression, I mean, is this something that we can go on record saying that those are 100% inoperable, those cards are now rendered completely useless, that they would not be used by someone trying to smuggle a human being? Is that fair to say?
I would think, sir, that nobody that's in the smuggling business that's going to try to go legally across a border would want to use one of those cards that's entered as stolen. And that, as I say, that would raise the profile. What they would really want is to steal a card from a legal user that's not been declared stolen, that has a similarity on it to the person on it, but still, even the biometrics then are not going to be the same.
So it's not just something that they could use ever for as an ID card or passing through anything. These cards now, once they've been deactivated, so to speak, if that's the right terminology, if there's no way they can use those at any place or any location for whatever purpose.
Sir, I wouldn't go that far. I think, along the border where there's active inspection of them, I think they'll be detected very quickly. I think people do use them for other purposes. But again, if the photograph doesn't match and they're very hard to do photo substitutions without destroying that card, it would be very difficult.
Okay. Mr. Judd, do you have any concern about their comments on that?
No. The ports of entry, and I don't work at the port of entry. I work between the ports of entry. For me, it would be very difficult if somebody took a card from, like, for instance, my card. If somebody took my card and I encountered them in the interior, there's no way for me to actually run that through the checks that Mr. Starr currently.
Fair enough. I'm satisfied with that answer. Let me ask you this. In moving forward, have we pretty much solidified that this mistake is now moving forward, this won't happen again? Is that something we've looked into as far as how this was broken, how this was stolen, how these things got loose to begin with?
I visited the transit facility that they went out of, sir, talked with the employees there. There had been a very hard look at how we were moving those cards. We have made some changes in how they're delivered. We are now only, I would prefer not to speak about some of the ways that we have gone into making some of those changes, sir, but we did look closely at it. I think our consular sheets are still accurate that, hijacking and carjacking is very, a problem in Mexico. We have to watch out for that, but we are taking additional measures to try to ensure that this doesn't occur again.
Well, I appreciate you doing. Did I hear somebody else weigh in? I'm sorry. Human trafficking in my state, North Carolina, even that far away from the border, is now number 9 in the country. We were able to pass early on training for border security. That piece of legislation is now law. This is a very technologically advanced, even in our own research here, we're showing, even some of your reports showing these aren't just ma and pa. These have been kind of assimilated into these large international organizations, and we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to shut that down at the border. Appreciate your help, and with that, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman who yield. How many border crossing cards are there in circulation? Do you have any idea? It's millions, right?
Millions, sir. Certainly
Millions.
Tens of millions.
So the idea is that Mexican nationals can get a border crossing card that is valid for 24 hours, is it 24 hours in the United States? It's a day pass, basically.
By state, there are distances that they can go within a certain state with them and other limitations on them.
So the idea is that you can basically go for the day, go shopping in, say, Nogales, and then come back across the border. But there are millions of them. There's no exit program, correct? Do you have any way, Mr. Judd, are you scanning how many of the border crossing cards that are used daily are scanned in their exit?
That I'm aware of, none.
How many are scanned on the inbound?
All of them.
So we have statistics about how many come into the United States, and we have 0 statistics on how many actually leave the United States. What's the consequence of being caught in the United States with just a border crossing card?
Next to nothing.
So we give out millions of passes. We have no exit program. We have no way of verifying, and there's no consequence if you do it anyway. And so thousands of them get stolen. I'm still worried that they're used in many ways as a flash pass, saying, yeah, I'm here illegally, I'm just here for the day. Even though in some places you can only go 25 miles into the United States. In other places, I think it's up to 40 miles if I'm not mistaken. But it's not supposed to be your free entry into the United States of America, and yet it's just inexcusable to have no exit program to be able to scan these passes. I'll yield back. My apologies. Ms. Plaskett, you're now recognized for a very generous 5 minutes.
Very generous. I like that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to all of you. I'm sitting here, and I know that we're talking about consulate construction, but I just came home from the U.S. Virgin Islands, which is now, along with Puerto Rico, considered the fourth border. And we had a weekend of violence that was profound, with a young man being gunned down in a daycare parking lot while his wife went to pick up their child, 100 shots being fired in the early evening in another part of the town, and then the following morning in front of a high school at 9 o'clock in the morning, granted it was a Saturday, another individual being gunned down. And I understand that a lot of this is, one, due to economic non-opportunity, failing schools, but also because of the guns and drugs that come through borders like my own. And when I look at, in 2007, that the U.S. and Mexico began what I hear is called the Merida Initiative, which according to the State Department is an initiative with 4 general goals: to disrupt criminal organizations, strengthen judicial institutions, improve border infrastructure and technology, and improve stability in the Mexican community. I wish that places like Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands had an initiative with its own government like that. But when I see some of the bills that are coming through and the lack of appropriations and the lack of support I'm getting from many of my colleagues on that, it makes me question if any of that's ever going to happen. But I know we're here supposed to talk about consulate construction and progress in Mexico, and so I've digressed, and I'll get back on topic to what I was supposed to be talking about. I was fortunate to go with my colleague, Mr. Chaffetz, to Mexico in May because I was interested in seeing how borders and consulates operate to stem not just the tide of illegal drugs and guns and individuals coming undocumented into this country, but also the amount of work and cooperation that's done in agriculture as well, in places like between Mexico and the United States, and the amount of trade and consumer goods and commerce that happens in these areas. And so we went and we visited the site where the new Mexico City embassy is supposed to be built. And I understand that there are a lot of consulates in this area because of the amount of commerce and trade, along with individuals that go on in these areas. So I wanted to ask, and I think, Mr. Moser, you would be the appropriate person, the 3 consulates in dangerous areas near the border, Tijuana, Juarez, Monterrey, they've all recently been completed in 2008, 2011, and 2014, respectively. Is that correct?
Yes, that's Ciudad Juarez, Tijuana, and Monterrey.
Okay. And all of these 3 consulates meet security standards?
Ma'am, I cannot build a building without Mr. Starr's explicit approval.
So, Mr. Starr, did they meet your approval?
Yes, they do.
Okay. And there's another consulate that's currently under construction that's estimated to be completed in 2017. Mr. Starr, is that correct? Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yes.
And then the consulate in Matamoros and the embassy in Mexico City are also supposed to soon be under construction.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
The 4 remaining consulates are in the site acquisition phase for new locations, correct?
That's correct, ma'am.
And as for the completion timelines, when we traveled to Mexico City, they were told that the Matamoros consulate was estimated to be completed in 2019, and Mexico City Embassy estimated to be finished in 2020. Are those timelines still in place?
Yes, ma'am.
And
They do depend somewhat on Mexico City's case about when we will receive the clean site.
Okay, and as I recall, the clean site was not for the entire space. It was for a portion of that embassy.
For a very small portion in the southern corner of the site.
And we have an idea when Mexico's, the government will give that?
Ma'am, we are working with our seller, in order to obtain the clean site. And we are working currently on a timeline for the delivery of that, and we expect it to be sometime in the fall of 2016.
Okay. And can you explain how State is responding to the delays in that, aside from just working with the seller?
If you mean how we're responding, I will say this. You know, we looked for 10 years, over a decade, at 20 different sites in Mexico City to find one that would meet our very robust and, by this hearing, everyone acknowledges, very important diplomatic platform that we have in Mexico City. When we finally identified from our seller the Nuevo Blanco site, which is a short couple-mile distance from our current location, we realized that this would actually fulfill all of our programmatic needs, from providing an effective platform to for our law enforcement agencies, to our traditional diplomatic activities, to even providing space for a Benjamin Franklin library, which is very important for our public diplomacy outreach. Yes, there have been delays in acquiring the site, but we still feel that within this timeline that this is sufficient for us to build a building from from the time we receive the site and get it up and operational. And that construction timeline is around 50 months.
And when I talked with the people on the site, primarily one of the main reasons why this was such a great site is because the ability to buy land of that size from multiple sellers is almost impossible.
Yes, ma'am, that is correct. Because, you know, and one of the things is I want to note here, you know, it would have been possible, of course, to find a greenfield site if we wanted to be well outside of Mexico City. But to the extent that we need to engage with our colleagues in the Mexican government and in businesses, we need to be in an urban location that really mirrors our present diplomatic platform.
Okay, thank you so much. I've exhausted my gracious and generous time, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for your generosity.
Thank you. Now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin, Mr. Judd, with you. Is it your understanding, okay, I know that you said you don't work at the ports of entry, but is it your understanding that the BCC cards can be used by individuals illegally to get into the country?
If the BCC cards, if somebody is not properly looking and inspecting who the person is, for instance, if you come through the port of entry and you present your card and they don't look at you and they just swipe it and it's a good card and they pass you through, absolutely, they can do that. But the cards really are, as Mr. Starr said, they're very good cards. They're very difficult to duplicate. But if you have somebody else's card and they don't properly inspect you, you could get into the United States.
Okay. Is there any evidence, Mr. Starr, that that has ever happened?
Not to my knowledge yet, sir, no.
All right. So you would say that no one has ever entered this country with a stolen card?
Sir, that would be very hard to say absolutely. I would say that it would be very difficult.
It would be very difficult because from what I understand, that has happened, and there are times inspectors don't check the cards properly. So there certainly are occasions where, as the chairman brought up earlier, they're used as flashcards. How often does an individual just flash the card and they're waved on into the country?
Sir, I can only tell you I spent about 3 hours at the San Ysidro border crossing with the ICE personnel, with the Homeland Security personnel that were there. I saw an incredibly dedicated group of people with very many duplicative stops where they're checking the people, they check the cars. I can't tell you because it's I'm with the State Department, but I have to tell you I was exceptionally impressed with how good they were.
Did they know you were there?
Yes, they did.
Okay. That probably has something to do with it. Is it true that the CBP was only able to read the cards, the RFID cards, about 2/3 of the time?
I'm sorry, sir. I don't know.
It's my understanding that the cards don't always work properly. And so my question ultimately is coming to, if the cards don't always work properly, then the stolen cards could still be used. Mr. Harris, you're nodding your head.
Well, I didn't notice I was doing that, but
Okay, it appeared to me you
it
were.
It was an accident, I guess. I'm not a port of entry expert, but again, I'll defer to my area of responsibility and what I'm focused on, which is targeting the criminal network. I will tell you through investigative means I won't talk about here, we're getting much better at identifying and rooting out those individuals who are using the border crossing cards for criminal purposes. We've identified, as a starting point, in South Texas, a little bit less than 1,000 individuals. Probably about half of those are border crossers, and we're systematically removing the cards from those individuals when they cross the border. So I think with the technology that y'all have supported us with, we're much better at being able to identify the people who are using the cards for illicit purposes versus for legitimate reasons.
Okay, so none of you have any awareness of the RFID cards not working?
No, sir, I'm not aware that they're not working. I think we have a very high degree of confidence in the card and a very high success rate with that card.
Okay. Mr. Starr, do you have any idea how many, or any of you for that matter, how many U.S. citizens have disappeared, have been kidnapped, abducted?
I don't have the figures in front of me, sir, no.
Who would have those figures?
Sir, I have some figures from last year and this year. If we're talking about U.S. citizens,
correct,
we believe from the reports that we have that in 2014, we had a total case of 146 kidnappings reported of U.S. citizens. And in this year, through September 8th, we've had 64 cases reported.
All right, what about other crimes,
Other
from
crimes
disappearances to abductions?
Other crimes are also down. In terms of violent crimes, we look at murder cases. Last year, we had, there were about 100 murder cases reported at homicides involving American citizens. This year, we're counting 89 so far to date.
Okay, is there any evidence of Americans being targeted?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know my time is up. I would just like to add that I have put forth, Mr. Judd mentioned a while ago about the horrible crime committed in Montana after the person was in your hands. And I've put forth a bill, TRACK, which stands for Tracking Reoffending Alien Criminals, specifically the sex offenders. I would urge my colleagues to check that out, H.R. 2793, and co-sponsored. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And we don't have necessarily the proper panelists to deal with this part of it, but to lead on, to follow up with what you said. One of the most infuriating parts of this are the people who are here illegally and commit crimes only to be released back into the interior of the United States of America. For fiscal year 2013 and 2014, the Obama administration released roughly 66,000 criminal aliens. According to enforcement and removal operations, there are 925,000 people with final orders to be removed from the country who have not, they haven't been removed. You know, there are people that are here illegally, and then there are people that are here illegally and they commit a crime. And to not focus on those people and make sure that they leave the country, and then when they do, to find that a huge percentage of them have to get picked up and coming back across the border. I mean, how do you look people in the eye and say 925,000 people are here illegally, were ordered to leave the country, and they did not? And then you add on top of that the number of other criminals. They're in our possession. We have them. They were caught. They were convicted. And we said, go ahead, you're released. And we have horrific stories in just about every single state you can think about. And it's just horrendous. We're now pleased to recognize Mr. Cuellar, who lives in Texas. He's very dedicated on this issue. We appreciate him and glad to waive him in by unanimous consent. We'll now recognize him for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you again for allowing me be back in my former committee. Thank you, and thank the ranking member also. I want to thank the witnesses from the State Department. Thank you for the good job that you do. I know it's a difficult job, but we appreciate it. My good friend Robert Harris, who used to live in Laredo, moved to the northern part of my district of San Antonio. It's always a good pleasure to see you and all the good work you did down there. Mr. Judd, all your men and women that work for Border Patrol, and I mean that work along with you and with Robert and all that, they do a good job. You know, thank anybody on the border. As you know, my brother is Border Patrol, Border Sheriff, should I say, down there on the border. So he and I, you know, we've lived there all of my life. Like I said, I drink the water, I breathe the air down there. My family lives there. I go back every weekend back to the border. So I do want to say thank you for all the work that you all do. Again, Mr. Chairman, I do know there's a couple issues, and I think there's some things that I would like to work with you as we talked a while ago. Want to talk about danger pay. I think on danger pay for the folks at the State Department, I think we need to talk about it. I think that's something that I think Congress will probably be involved in this issue. My understanding is you already let your employees know. You haven't let us know, but I can tell you that Congress will probably have a say-so on this. Not that we want to micromanage, but I think it's part of at least the appropriations process will be involved. The issue of cost of construction, and I understand, I've been to the one in Mexico, I understand what they're doing in Nuevo Laredo and other parts of the world. I think the cost of construction is extremely high. Sometimes people, I think they charge us just because we're the federal government, they charge us more. I understand all the arguments about security and you got to do this. I understand all that, but I still think they're low high. On the issues of closing the consulate, Mr. Chairman, I think we definitely disagree on that, as I don't think we ought to close the consulates. Let me just try to address, Mr. Chairman, if you allow me just a few minutes beyond my 5 minutes, since I think everybody's gone now, except you and I. Let me talk about the border. I want to go from the border and then go into Mexico. If you look at the FBI statistics, the border crime rate, or the national crime rate, is about 4.5 murders per 100,000. Laredo, my hometown, is about 1.5 murders per 100,000. You take the border crime rate, it's lower than the national crime rate using FBI stats, murder, assaults, rapes, you know, name them. If you look at the top 10 cities with the highest murder rates in the U.S. per 100,000 population, none of them are on the border. None of them are on the border. If you look at one of the NGOs that looked at the top 50 cities with the highest homicides per 100,000, and if you look at it, you know, you have San Pedro Sula. This is from the year 2011 to 2014. Number one is in Honduras, San Pedro Sula, Honduras. You had Acapulco, number 3, 104 murders per 100,000. The number one was about 171 murders per 100,000. Then you go on, sorry if there's anybody, any of my colleagues, San Luis was number 19. And then you had Detroit, number 22. Then you had Juarez, who the numbers I've gone down was number 27. Then you had Nuevo Laredo, number 34. Then you had Baltimore, number 40, and then go all the way down to Cuernavaca in Mexico on that. So again, I would ask you to look at some of these numbers, because there's always the reality and the perception. And being on the border, I'll be the first one to say, Mr. Chairman, you know, there are problems like any other city, but it's not the way some people paint it to be. Travel warnings, again, if we go based on travel warnings, and we pulled out the travel warnings that the State Department has. Yes, I do see Mexico here, but I do see so many other countries where there's travel warnings. And if we go on the basis of travel warning, Mr. Chairman, I think we probably have to close consulates, and there's 2.5 pages of countries that we probably have to include, including one of the ones that we're dealing with this week, or maybe I just ought to note that we might postpone the Israel issue. Even the West Bank, Gaza, there's a travel warning there on that. So I can go on 2.5 pages of countries if we happen to go on that. Why do we need consulates on that, even in places like Mexico? 2 reasons. One is the trade and the relations that we have, but the other one has to do with immigration itself first. Before I go on that, let me just talk about Mexico. Before we did Plan Merida, And in 2008, we worked with Ambassador Garza, President Bush, Roberta Jacobson, which I'm hoping will soon be the ambassador of Mexico. Mr. Chairman, she's a good lady to know. I think you might know her. She'll be a great ambassador to Mexico. We were giving Mexico $36 million a year, while we give certain countries like Israel $3.1 billion a year. And here is Mexico, which is one of our greatest trading partners. Mr. Chairman, I think you highlighted some of the numbers. But let me talk about Laredo, where you and Blake, and I'm sorry I couldn't be there. I was bringing my little girl up to Washington the day you were up here. But Laredo, for example, handles about 40% of all the trade between the U.S. and Mexico, 12,000 trailers a day that we have there. If you put the trucks, line them up and down the border, on a day basis, all the trucks to Laredo on one day would go from Laredo to a little bit south of San Antonio. You put all the trucks on a monthly basis going through just Laredo, it will go from Laredo all the way to La Paz, Bolivia. And if you go on the number of trucks that pass Laredo on a year, they almost will wrap around the world twice. So it gives you the $500 billion that we have of trade every day, shows you why Mexico is so important to us. And by the way, one more for the folks that want to push Mexico away. If an import comes in from China, it has about a 4% American parts on it. If something comes in from Canada, our #1 trading partner, will have about a 25% parts. But if something comes in from Mexico, an import comes in from Mexico, it will have a 40% American parts with it. So that shows us the connection that we have with Mexico. Trade. Let me go into immigration part of it. Robert, you and I spoke a lot, Mr. Harris, we spoke a lot about the unaccompanied kids that came in last year on that. We've seen the numbers gone down, Mr. Chairman. They've gone down. They're about half. But, again, we can add more Border Patrol, and I agree, adding more Border Patrol. I want to see more men and women in blue, which are the customs officers. But if you look at something that's happened, I've always said that we can't play defense on the 1-yard line, which is called the U.S. border. We spend about $18 billion for border security across the nation. If we just play a little different defense on the 20-yard line, and last year the appropriations we added, I think we worked with y'all, we added about $80 million to help Mexico secure the southern border with Guatemala. We always talk about southern border, but we ought to look at the southern border with Mexico. If you look at it, from October 2014 to April 2015, Mexico apprehended over 92,000 Central American migrants, 20,000 more than we do in the U.S., 70,000. So if Mexico would allow those 92,000, Border Patrol would have been dealing with those folks a lot more. So, Mr. Chairman, I do understand that we have issues in Mexico. There's no ifs or buts. We need to work with them. Construction costs, I agree, I think they're a little high. We can work on that. Closing the consulates, bad mistake. Danger pay, Mr. Chairman, I want to work with you because I think we need to talk about there are certain parts of Mexico where I think they deserve danger pay. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for allowing me to be back in my former committee. And to all the witnesses, thank you so much for all the good work that you do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin for 5 minutes.
I've been in another hearing, so I hope I don't repeat some questions. First of all, I want to point out that overall, we're kind of highlighting Mexico here. And just reviewing the murder rates around the country, Mexico is far from the most violent country in the world, right? I mean, you have countries like Jamaica or El Salvador that are maybe twice the murder rate, or Honduras, which is 4 times the murder rate of Mexico. But Mexico does have a high murder rate. I think it's about over 4 times the American rate, 5 times I'd say 4 times the American rate. I wondered if some of you could maybe comment on the differences in some cities compared to other cities, and whether you think it is right now particularly dangerous in these cities with the higher rates themselves.
Sir, I think the embassy in Mexico City and the different types of agencies that are represented there closely follow where we have rising narco-trafficking, drug violence. And I think that's what fuels a lot of the murder rates. As we said earlier, 25 million Americans visit Mexico every single year. Very few of those people have any type of problem there. Tourism is a very big business. We're acutely aware that certain places where the drug cartels, either one is trying to take over another or there's a split in the organization, and that's what happened in Matamoros over the last year, essentially. The violence can certainly spike. I think we do try to differentiate between those places where the violence is going up and make sure that that's reflected in our warnings and tell people that. I think we try to be accurate about what the real threats are to Americans there and give them a general idea. But it is not a level of violence that is all over Mexico. It is in different cities and primarily where the drug traffickers are contesting territory.
Do we have a facility in Acapulco? Do we have a facility in Acapulco?
We have a consular agency there, right? Not a consulate. We have a consular agent there.
That's an example of one just pulling it up that looks to be a very, very dangerous city. But could you let me know, I mean, is that like some American cities where overall it's dangerous, but there are a lot of areas that are okay? I mean, because that is one just pulling it up that is just, I think the murder rate is like 3 times that in Milwaukee where I'm near, and that's not a very well-run city. But do you feel that, I mean, do you feel that our people are safe in a city like that if you stick in the right areas, or is it?
Sir, we provide guidance in our travel advisories by state and even by city, and there is specific guidance for Acapulco. I'm not sure aware what it is right now. Typically, we advise people, stay off the streets at night in these dangerous places, stay closer to home. If we know of a particular type of violence that's going to occur, we'll issue a warning. So I think, we think it's manageable, but we do have to monitor the situations, and we have to monitor the risk and take measures to mitigate against those risks when they happen.
Just by point of reference, of all the Americans working in Mexico right now who work for the American government, do you mean how many work there overall, and how many have been victims, say, of some sort of crime in the last year?
We have 2,800 employees. That includes our locally engaged staff as well in the mission in Mexico. I don't have a number for how many have been involved in crimes, but it's minimal. I don't know that we have any. We have those at hand right now.
I think since 2010, we've had two Americans that were killed.
Since 1985, we've had 2. Yeah.
Since 1985, or
2 Americans have been killed.
Since when?
Since 1985.
Okay, so 2 Americans have been killed out of a little under 3, when we have 3,000 employees. We've had about 2 murders in the last 30 years is what you're saying. Okay, thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank the gentleman. A few kind of tie-up questions, and we'll be done here. Ambassador Moser, in Mexico City, last number we had is that we were planning in the new embassy, and I recognize that it's behind schedule. We were planning on 1,335 desks. The cost had gone from the original estimate of $577 million to $943 million. Any adjustments in those, or are those still the numbers that you're working with?
Sir, those are correct, but I will note that the original figure, the $550 million figure that we initially reported to Congress, did not include the site acquisition cost. And that's the reason. So the real difference is about 700 versus 900, and that does reflect the 40% growth in staffing.
And these are real dollars. Every time we spend dollars here, we're pulling money out of American people's pockets to give it to somebody else. And so the concern is that you have a $200 million growth there. You were looking at roughly just a shy of $250 million for the building, the construction of Matamoros and the Nuevo Laredo facilities. That's a huge amount of dollars going out the door when you consider that Matamoros is looking at 103 desks and Nuevo Laredo is 88 desks, and we're going to spend $250 million.
Sir, if I could just make one comment on that. I, too, am very, very concerned about the cost of these facilities, and we are always focused on the cost. But it is true that it does take more money per capita or per desk to build a smaller facility than it does a large one. Because as I've said, the first point of all of this is your requirements. What do you have to do? And it's easier to expand a building and make it bigger to get a per desk charge than it is. And,
in Monterey, well, let me jump in here. Same country, right? In Monterey, $179 million for 199 desks, but Matamoros, which is 103 desks, is $191 million.
Well, as I said, it depends on the requirements for the various locations, and a smaller number
Can
of
you name
persons.
any situation where the cost has gone down?
Yes, sir.
Okay, what is it?
Well, there are places where it's surprisingly inexpensive.
Yeah, but where's a place where the cost estimate went down? Where you came in under budget or even on budget?
I'll have to get back to you with the.
Yeah, exactly. Because we've looked at this. And the reason that we are going to continue to focus on this is every single thing we've done since the time I was elected, since the President took office at the same time, every one of these facilities has gone up in costs. Every one of them. And they're not even close. We didn't come up with those estimates. The State Department came up with those estimates, and now we're seeing this double-digit percentage growth by the billions of dollars. I mean, by the billions. Let me keep going because we are trying to wrap this up. In Nuevo Laredo, when I went and visited the site, beautiful site, I can understand the location, the proximity to Laredo, Texas. I get it. And I do believe that they need a new facility. The one they're in currently is old. I understand that. But on that site, there were living quarters that were a potential living quarters for the Consulate General. The recommendation from the people on the ground who are working there was to keep that facility. And yet the OBO said, no, we're not going to keep that facility, and they destroyed it. I have questions on a follow-up as to why was it destroyed, why didn't it meet the specifications, and number two is, have you figured out and determined where the Consulate General is actually going to live in Nuevo Laredo?
Sir, that's a very good line of inquiry, and let me explain that. That in that particular instance, we had a smallish site, somewhere around, I think, a little bit less than 5 acres. And in order for us to situate our building on the site and have all of the required setbacks and all the required security requirements that we would have to have, according to our overseas security standards, that we had to demolish the existing residence on the site. Now, where will that person go? We will obtain appropriate housing for the principal officer, and that's what we do in countries all over the world.
Here's the concern. The cost has grown. It's under construction. The site has been, but this is there are only 88 desks, okay? It's a smaller facility. The Consulate General and his facilities and his ability or her ability to conduct work on behalf of the United States is pivotal. And here we are, into September of 2015, and y'all haven't figured out where he's going to live. It's a pretty big, important question.
Well, he does have a residence now, sir.
Yes, understood, on the old compound. But you have to travel, as I did. We had something like 30 armed guards, escorters from the one facility to the next facility. You had to have the Mexican National Army lead us in a convoy with some rather large guns and whatnot ready to go at any moment. It's a very dangerous situation. So I just don't understand why we're this far into it, because there's going to be a cost. And so when we look at $154 million, that doesn't include the site acquisition or development or purchase of something for the Consulate General, does it?
No, sir, it doesn't.
Have you informed Congress that this number is shy of what it needs to be?
Sir, it is. We usually find principal officers or fund principal officers' residence out of our leasehold account, which is also appropriation from Congress. And we do have a dialogue with our appropriators about how much these individual residences cost.
Okay. It's amazing that you get down there and see that there's no plan and no, other than, hey, we're going to continue to look at it. To suggest that they took 10 years to try to find a facility to locate the Mexico City embassy, I mean, that's an embarrassment. 10 years?
Sir, to find a big enough site where we can put a facility that really accomplishes the diplomatic goals we're trying to
you bought a
achieve in
site that's
Mexico.
toxic, and by the Mexican government, it's so toxic you can't build there. And there are hundreds of people that are going to suffer and live in inadequate working quarters. Again, I want to try to wrap up here. When will the new danger pay, when will this new program be implemented? Has it been announced?
It has been announced, sir, but I'll turn that over to my colleagues.
When does that take place?
The announcements went out to the Post, I believe, last week. Congressman, I appreciate how much you're concerned about the danger pay. I can have staff come up here and work with your staff and explain how we do this and how we grade these things, if that would be helpful.
We'll try it again. You and I tried it in a classified setting, and it didn't go so well, did it?
No, sir, we had our differences.
Yeah,
but,
and so this is not a new topic that I sprung on you here at this. You knew I was going to bring it up.
I know that, sir, but I think if we could show you detailed how we actually look at each post, what the ratings are, what we do to go into it, and I think my staff working with your staff.
I look forward to seeing that formula. For those men and women who work in Mexico, who have loved ones that are here in the United States, and their husband or wife or sibling or whoever, or daughter or whatever is working in Mexico, and their pay just got cut, you can look at the Obama administration, you can look at Secretary Kerry, and you can look to that organization, because it wasn't us Republicans. Don't tell us that you were tight on budgets.
This was not about cutting any benefits.
They did get their,
Madam
are
Morris,
you telling me
Madam
that
Madam Morris went up. Madam Morris went up.
Are there people working in Mexico who earn less than they did before?
Yes.
That's my problem.
Some.
That's the problem. And
but
it's not
based on the conditions on the ground.
Yeah, and can they in Nuevo Laredo, can they walk outside of the consulate? No,
they
can't.
Be across the border and be in a Walmart and be in a Dairy Queen very quickly.
Really?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I can't wait to play that video for those people working there. Shame on you for saying.
Sir, I've walked that ground. I talk with those people. I look at our security every single day. There is nobody that is more concerned with the security of our people overseas than I am. Their allowances.
I don't agree with you.
I'm sorry,
I
sir.
do not. I have been there. I have talked to those people.
Sir, I start
Don't tell me
every
that.
morning.
Don't get on your high horse, because you just cut their pay.
Sir,
I didn't do that. You did. And when I went down there, I didn't know that this was an issue. They brought it up.
Sir.
And if we sat them down in the room and to think if it's fair, it's not safe. When I talked to the people who were there working in that facility, it's so dangerous they can't go outside.
I start every single day looking at the threats to our people worldwide.
And you're getting Mexico wrong. You're getting Mexico
sir,
wrong.
And I'll bring staff up and we'll work with your staff.
Yeah, you can bring staff up all you want. I can tell you, I have been there. I have looked at those statistics. I have looked at the people there. You cut their pay, and I think it's wrong. And I think both people on both sides of this aisle think it's wrong. It was petty. It was not useful. It was not productive. It's cut morale. It was unnecessary, and I think it should be changed. I really do. I really do. It's not for a lack of appropriation. It's the management of the State Department. That's the question here. That's the question, and we're going to continue to work on that. There are a lot of other issues. I do believe we have to engage in meaningful immigration reform. There has to be a legal, lawful way to get here. If you don't fix legal immigration, you're never ever going to solve this problem. One of the issues we need to work on is asylum reform. I actually have an asylum reform bill. In the conclusion, I cannot thank the men and women of particularly the Border Patrol for all they do and the good, hard work that they do. I have been down there. It's one of my joys to go out with them. In the Ajo district, I've been out there with them. As we chase people coming across the border. You can sit there and just watch them all day long coming across, and these people apprehend them in a very professional manner. They work hard. It's hard, very dangerous work. Can't thank them enough for the good work that the people do in the Customs and Border Patrol. ERO has an exceptionally difficult mission. ICE is doing some very important work. There are good people doing work all across the board. And my point, sir, is with those people working in the State Department, they too have a vital mission. And it's just unacceptable to us. It's just mind-boggling that they would knowingly and willingly cut their pay. telling them that it's more safe when there are conditions there that are not conducive. To say that, oh, they can just go across the border so they can get to a Dairy Queen, yeah, that doesn't cut it. That's not acceptable. With that, I appreciate all of you for participating today. I think this is a good hearing. This hearing stands adjourned.